paying Geo for a damn bench.
하늘이 맙다.
Take 7. Several? 5 actually. Or is he telling me to open several? Doesn't matter, just walk. Well.
Really? Ci sono partner.
Back.
Bafanada.
Lolo to go with.
Silksong feels a lot more difficult and hostile than the first Hollow Knight. I know my own clumsy hands are partly to blame for the endless deaths, but it also feels as though the game itself is more dangerous. Far loose traps and enemy placement is a lot more unforgiving, with a difficulty curve that seems to present itself right from the start of the game, unlike Hollow Knight's more gradual increase in difficulty. On top of Hornet being more agile and faster, which means combat is more fast-paced, the enemies are designed to match your speed, making everything much more aggressive. But what got to me the most is the increased damage. Many enemies, bosses, and even traps deal 2 points of damage instead of the usual 1 in the early game, as well as invincibility frames just not existing or being way shorter. Being comboed by enemies is pretty much unavoidable, or maybe, like Hornet would say, we just need to. Silksong feels a lot. Is it that actually makes someone's life?
Imagine if every corner of your kitchen was as iconic as
The expansive dream and past was split. One realm now must stay apart. Darkest reaches, fading red, terror of sleep, the nightmare's heart. Let's take this bit by bit. We know that there is a dream realm in the world of Hollow Knight. It's where the Radiance is, it's where the Pale King's corpse is, and even the Lifeblood creature appears to inhabit some kind of dream realm, given the appearance of Dreamcatcher particles in this room. It's not really clear if these are all different dream realms or branches off of one big dream realm. The dream realm where the Dreamers are and the Radiants are look very different from the Pale King's, which also looks very different from Beretta's dream. If there is a distinction between these areas, it's vague. However, we do know there is one special, very different realm called the Nightmare Realm, which was completely split off from the main dream realm. While regular dreams are made up of essence, the Nightmare Realm is made up of a different type of burning essence, which Grimm describes as the flame in dream. For simplicity's sake, I'll just call this different essence Nightmare Essence. But what exactly caused this split? These kinds of splits are common in creation stories, like how Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades split up the heavens, seas, and underworld, or how the world of Dark Souls went from being a gray, unchanging world to one divided up by lords. Even our own scientific understanding of the universe starts with a theory that three of the fundamental forces of the universe were unified, but eventually split apart from one another. So lazy writing like this is kind of just how creation stories go. But that doesn't really help us answer why the Nightmare Realm has to stay apart from the Dream World. A pretty common theory is that the Radiants somehow caused the separation, but there really isn't any evidence for this. Maybe if Grimm actually commented once on the Radiants, but he really doesn't seem to give two shits about any of that, unfortunately. So whether this split was natural or caused by the action of some higher being, chances are we'll never know. Anyway, it seems like the Nightmare is the main higher being who resides in this Nightmare realm, and its design stands in stark contrast to the other higher beings we see in Hallowest. We've got a moth, a worm, a plant, a slug, and a giant heart made of patchwork with dozens of eyes on it. At the very core of it, the Nightmare heart appears to be made of Nightmare essence, similar to how the Radiance is composed of a light similar to essence. And while the Nightmare heart may seem different from other higher beings on the surface, it does have one thing in common with them. It really likes to mess around with regular bugs, pulling them into its service. In order to survive, the Nightmare heart needs to conduct a ritual involving the Grimtroop so that it can feed off the flames of ruined civilizations. Basically, ancient abandoned kingdoms like Hallowest or Disneyland are a gold mine for Nightmare essence. So the main way the Nightmare heart feeds is by using the Troop to find these kingdoms and harvest the essence for itself. And this ritual happens over and over as an endless cycle the heart uses to cheat death. Of course, finding kingdoms is the first step in this process, which brings us to this corpse in the Howling Cliffs. This bug is wearing a makeshift mask that has a similar design to the masks other Grimtroop members wear. Dream nailing this bug brings a device called a Nightmare Lantern into the physical world. This lantern seems to act as a sort of anchor for the Grimtroop, and lighting it is what causes the Grimtroop to arrive at Hallowest. If we dream nail the corpse again, it says, "Master, my wolf, apart from you, apart from kin, it pains me so." God was silly. This bug apparently has some kind of job that involves it leaving the troop and traveling to Hallowest. So it seems like the Grimtroop actually designates certain bugs to travel to different kingdoms. Once they get there, well, I'm not sure. Do they just die once they reach a kingdom? Or did this particular bug die before it could set up the lantern? We have to dream nail the lantern out of it. Maybe this is a litmus test for anyone who would help the Grimtroop, requiring them to have some access to the dream world. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't even be able to interact with any of the Grimkin in the first place. Now, we don't know if these bugs are just sent off in a random direction, or if they know how to reach these kingdoms. The Godseeker and Coral mention that the winds carry them to Hallowest, which is odd. Alahel is the wind blowing towards one specific spot. Oddly enough, the Philippine does have some other weird connections with wind. One reason is the King's brand also blow wind throughout Hallowest for some reason. But Wind lore and Hollow Knight is a whole other can of worms we'll have to save for later. Anyway, the Godseeker also detected the Philippines afterglow while traveling to Hallowest. But I personally don't think the Grimtroop bug could have done that, considering it doesn't appear to have a God-tuner device like the Godseekers. Instead, I'm guessing a large amount of these bugs just wander around aimlessly until they can find civilizations that could be harvested for their Nightmare essence. So the Grimtroop emphasizes just how barren the world of Hallowest really is. The Nightmare King's Dreamnail dialogue in God hints at this with the line, "Scattered lands, nightmare binds all." This implies that the Grimtroop used the Nightmare Realm as a way to reach different kingdoms, which is what we see once we light the Nightmare Lantern. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that the Grimtroop is well-traveled. And as it turns out, the Grimtroop might give us our best look into what the world outside Hallowest really looks like. Hidden within the Grimtroop's tent is a secret room that can only be accessed through some tricky wall jumps. In this room we can see some chests, a pile of masks, and this strange contraption. Now there are a few theories as to what this thing might be. At the very least, we know it's important because there is a seal protecting it. One idea is that it is some kind of device that can move the tent between the real world and the Nightmare world. Or it could somehow be related to Grimm's performance, with all the spotlights and other stuff. But if you look at the in-game art files, the assets for this device refer to it as a chart. So I think this device is actually supposed to be a map of some kind. Now, of course, an art file name is by no means canon, but our only option here is to speculate anyway. So let's just have some fun with this. But bear in mind, this is by no means conclusive. So is this thing a chart of the real world, or of the Nightmare Realm, or what? Unfortunately, none of that's clear. But these balls are possibly points of interest for the Grim Troop. So these might be the various locations they have traveled to over the years, sort of like web addresses that point to specific domains on the internet, like twitter.com/mossbag69, or discord.gg/mossbag, or mossbag.com. And I'm sure you've already noticed that there are 19 of these ball things. So does that mean there are at least 18 other civilizations that the Grim Troop has visited? What other crazy worlds could be out there? Waterworld? Moonworld? New Jersey? However, if this really is supposed to be a chart of where the Grim Troop has been, it's really weird looking. Why does the world of Hollow Knight vaguely look like a cock and balls? It honestly looks more like some kind of planetary model as opposed to a topographical map. Which might make sense. These kingdoms could all be deep underground. We aren't even sure if Halness is on the surface. It appears to be, but we can't see any stars or direct evidence of such. Maybe the land of storms is on the surface, considering there is rain and thunder, but maybe these weather patterns were created by the gods of thunder and rain that were once there already. So a three-dimensional map like this could make sense in this world. It's not like they would have a map on a piece of paper or a globe or something, and it's not that big of a stretch to assume that the Grim Troop would have some kind of map to help them navigate around. And if this is actually a chart of the Nightmare Realm, then it doesn't really have to look like anything to be believed. But at the end of the day, there really isn't much to go off of here. So for now, the definitive answer to what this thing is eludes us. Getting back to the Nightmare Lantern, whoever lights this thing gets entwined into a contract with the Grim Troop, all without so much as a terms and conditions. The Grim Troop is summoned to Durmouth, where they set up their tent and prepare Halness to be harvested of its nightmare essence. The Grim Troop, of course, has a Troop Master, known as Troop Master Grim. Grim has a unique aesthetic, which has made him pretty popular in the Hollow Knight fandom for some reason. He
Ability, affordability. Only one place does it.
like a Gen 7 star mode. Like, can he even be considered a bug of any kind? I've heard some people say that he's supposed to be a vampire moth. Looks absolutely nothing like that to me. Might as well say he's a Caterpillar MD6250 rotary drill. No, Grim and his troop appear to be a hodgepodge of horror tropes. Regardless of what kind of bug Grim may be, he definitely draws from Dracula. He's got the long flowing cape, he can explode into smaller winged creatures, and his moveset seems to borrow quite a lot of concepts from the Castlevania Dracula fights. And you've got the whole creepy traveling circus thing. Although it's not a very good circus. They just set up a tent and then expect the visitors to perform. Kind of the opposite of how that's supposed to work, I think. When the knight first talks to Grim, he gives him the rundown of what the troop is doing. Well, he gives a very brief, very vague explanation. He gives the knight the Grimchild charm and tells him to seek out the Grimkin, who have been collecting nightmare essence throughout Hallownest. Using the Grimchild, the knight will be able to find Grimkin, kick their asses, and store the essence inside the Grimchild. Once returned, the Grimchild evolves into a second of 4 different forms, implying that the Grimchild might have fed off these flames to become stronger. But it's not just the flames of Hallownest's nightmare essence that the Grimchild feeds off of. According to Grim, it can also feed off the heat of a passionate dance, or in other words, the Grimm boss fight. There's also one other way the Grimm child can feed, by consuming the Nightmare King himself. Yes, like most things in Hollow Knight, it all comes back to lore. The Nightmare King can be fought after collecting 3 sets of flames from the Grimmkin, scattered all throughout Almas. Once this is done, Grimm can be found sleeping in the far side of the tent. Dream-Yelling Grimm takes the knight to the Nightmare Realm. There we can find the Nightmare Heart, surrounded by Grimmkin nightmares. We then see the Nightmare Heart suffer from a pretty severe myocardial rupture as the Nightmare King emerges from inside. The Nightmare King is basically just a much faster version of the Troop Master Grimm, with more flame on his attacks. According to more poetry, the Troop wants to burn away the Nightmare King and feed it to the Grimm Child. Once this is accomplished, the Grimm Child's eyes will burn brightly with the flame of the Nightmare Heart, and everyone involved with the Grimm Troop will disappear. Well, almost everyone, but we'll get to that. So basically, we dream-nailed into Grimm, found the Nightmare Heart, killed the Nightmare King inside it, and then that got fed to Grimm Jr. Grimm was a vessel for the Nightmare Heart, and now the heart has been transferred over into a fresh new vessel, the Grimm Child. From here we can assume that the Grimm Child will grow into a new Grimm and start his own troop, and move away and never call home again. Now that's cool and all, but it raises some interesting questions. What is the rest of the Grimm troop doing now? Do they just sit around and wait for the grown-up Grimm Child to show up? Also, if this little guy is the new Grimm, what happens if we take him into the Temple of the Black Egg? Will Grimm be trapped with us in there forever? Does he get completely destroyed in the Dream No More ending? And then, of course, we have the Embrace the Void ending. Does Grimm just get completely consumed by the Shade Lord, lost forever in a sea of void? The point is, the Knight is probably the last creature Grimm would want to be stuck with in charm form, because there really aren't any endings that go well for the Knight's physical body. But of course, there is more to the Grimm troop than just Grimm himself. We also have the Grimmkin, as well as characters like Brum and Divine. We get the best insight into Grimm's entourage from Confessor Gigi. Perhaps you suspect that they hide their true appearance. You'd be right. They favor a projection over truth, shrouding themselves in form streamed. Best be careful. Assisting them might benefit you, but who knows what suffering it may cause. Digging into this dialogue, you can see 2 different types of Grimm troop members. You've got the Grimmkin, who appear to be more like ghosts. They can teleport around and even show up in the Nightmare Realm. Then you've got bugs like Brum, Divine, and the Grimmstein, who appear to be like normal bugs, and I'm using the phrase normal bugs loosely. The one thing all these characters have in common are the masks they wear. Even the bug outside the kingdom is wearing a Grimm troop mask, although this one looks more like a third-rate cosplay than actual Grimm troop wardrobe. Now, I have talked about masks a lot on this channel. The Mask Maker video, my King's Pass video, Godmaster, Coliseum of Fools, even my review of the mask starring Jim Carrey mentions them. But that's no surprise. Masks are very mysterious and important to the world of Hollow Knight. But Gigi doesn't actually mention the masks outright. Instead, she says that the Grimm troop prefers projection and to hide themselves in forms dreamed. This could be referring to how Grimmkin are literally dream creatures. They come in 3 forms: novices, masters, and nightmares. It seems that as they become more devoted to Grimm, they become more nightmare-like in their appearance. But from what we see in the Grimm troop tents, these masks appear to be real physical objects. This might imply that the Grimmkin use masks as conduits to project their dream forms into the real world. Perhaps that is even the case with Grimm himself. But that claim is pretty speculative, so don't hang your hat on that being true. There are plenty of ghosts that don't have anything physical to them, but still interact with the real world. But what is clear is that these masks do have an effect on living bugs, and we can see this pretty clearly with Brum. During the last phase of harvesting essence, the Knight can find Brum hidden away in Deep Nest, far away from the eyes of Grimm. Brum laments the never-ending cycle of the Grimm troop, and asks the Knight to aid him in banishing the troop from the Howling Mist forever. If the Knight goes through with this request and uproots the Nightmare Lantern in the Howling Cliffs, Grimm's tent disappears from Durmham, and next to the bench we can find a very different-looking Brum, under a new name, Nim. Nim uses a very clear look at how the mask Brum was wearing affected him. As Brum, he had no memory of his past life, and his demeanor was very constrained. As Nim, he is more carefree, and has forgotten his time in the troop. More surprisingly, however, Nim has also physically shrunk down in size. That's rough, buddy. The mask itself appears to transform into the carefree Melody charm, which grants protection to anyone who wears it. We can see that the mask still radiates with the power of the Grim Troop by the flames that come off the knight when it activates. So that sort of ties the masks to having a dreamlike quality of sorts, similar to what Professor Gigi mentioned. Nim's experience also closely parallels the line from Mask Maker: to change a face, to conceal it fully within another. A powerful protection that is, but one with sad consequence. The original mind is destroyed, though those of striking will may retain a sliver of that concealed self. Nim's mask made him bigger and connected to the Grim Troop, but his original mind was lost, and it only came back because he fought back against Grim's wishes, remembering that he used to be more than just a vessel. So it seems like these masks basically brainwash members of the troop into serving the Nightmare Heart. Maybe these bugs were all forced to serve the troop, and that might be what Gigi is referring to when she mentions those who would suffer by completing the ritual. This gives us an interesting contrast. Mask Maker says he makes masks for those who ask, and says it is a gift for a world deserving. But the Nightmare Heart uses it as a way to control bugs and make them work towards its own goals. Of course, working as a slave under the heart might be the alternative of trying to survive in the wasteland that covers much of the world, but it's still kind of a dick move. And since I talked about Brum so much, I should at least mention Divine. Her job within the Grim Troop is to... well, I'm not really sure why she's here. She talks about how she can smell something in Hellnest, referring to the fragile charms that Lake Eater sells. You can give her these charms, which she will then turn into unbreakable charms by eating them and shitting them out. Yeah, I'm not sure why Grim keeps her around. Divine doesn't even leave with the Grim Troop if you complete the ritual without finishing the side quest. I mean, from a gameplay perspective, it's nice, but lore-wise, it doesn't make any sense. I guess Grim just doesn't really care if she's around or not. Also, I guess she has more autonomy than Brum because she's only wearing half a mask. Instead, you need to give all the unbreakable charms, then talk to Lake Eater so he will seek out Divine. Which, well, that doesn't go well for him. However, if you choose to banish the Grim Troop, Divine leaves for good, and if you didn't get the unbreakable charms, then you're just shit out of luck. And then we have the Grimsteeds. These bugs appear to be the same species as Willow, but are also wearing masks. Some people have pointed out that Willow's tent is a shade of red, implying that she might have been part of the Grim Troop at one point. But, come on. It's clearly just red because it's covered in the blood of her numerous victims. In conclusion, the Grim Troop is a traveling band of bugs, who all serve a higher being known as the Nightmare Heart. They use the Nightmare Realm to fast travel between the different ruined kingdoms of the world, harvesting nightmare essence to prolong the heart's existence. Masks are perhaps used to keep these bugs in line and connected to the troop. But despite that, some bugs are able to fight against this control, and it's up to the player to decide what fate should befall these poor bugs. Of course, most likely the player won't have any idea what's going on at all, and that decision is made completely arbitrarily. One final thing to note is that Grim is known by the White Lady, despite being from so far away. And while Gigi finds Grim unfamiliar, she is still able to pick up on what is really going on with the troop. This helps us realize how learned these characters are, which might not be a surprise for the White Lady, but more so for Gigi. This character has a lot going on that we just don't know about. And so there you have it. I felt bad for leaving the Grim Troop mostly out of my main lore video, but man, there was a lot to discuss here. As for future Hollow Knight content, I know many of you are worried and think that I am somehow starved for content, but that couldn't be further from the truth. There are plenty of other lore things I could talk about. I could make another Zope video, and there is some more stuff to talk about regarding Zope. And I really want to do a deep dive into the political side of Hollow Knight, particularly whether or not Zope is a libertarian.
Plain grilled chicken fajita, added bacon, grilled veggies, and give it a case of below. The chicken fajita bacon melt. For a limited time, only at
there have been a lot of Hollow Knight icebergs to pop up in the past year, and I've always wanted to make a video covering them. But Hollow Knight icebergs, like a lot of other icebergs, tend to get a bit too convenient. Also, I show up on a lot of these icebergs, which makes me feel weird. However, just recently, a Reddit user known as SteveBoyo96 posted an iceberg that I wanted to talk about on this channel. Normally, these icebergs end up covering a lot of material I've already discussed before, which is another reason why I haven't done one of these videos yet. There's a little bit of that here too, but for the most part, there is a lot of things I've never even talked about on this channel, so that's pretty convenient. If you don't know how icebergs work, basically the further down the image we go, the more obscure and more mysterious the entries are supposed to be. With Hollow Knight being a fairly recent game, and its fan base being fairly large, it's hard for anything to really be all that obscure, without it just being made up. But thankfully, that's not the case here. So let's dive in. The surface level is all the normie stuff. If you have put any time into researching Hollow Knight, you have probably heard of most of these entries. The Land of Storms is a hidden area in God that can only be accessed by clearing each Pantheon challenge with each Bible. It shows off a strange land the gods secretly live before making their pilgrimage to Hallows. It's a super secret area that the vast majority of Hollow Knight players won't even encounter, but it's a very well-known area at this point, so it's not surprising to see it at the top of the iceberg. In Kingdom's Edge, there's a room with a single exit, with a tent blocking out the rest of the area. There really isn't anything significant here, but I think it captures that feeling of wonder and mystery about what's not just beyond our reach. I remember feeling that way a lot as a kid playing Super Mario 64, trying to get out of the courtyard of the castle. The elegy for Hollow Nest is a short poem that appears at the start of the game. Within the code for Hollow Knight, there's actually several more verses that go into detail about how Nest grew over time, fell to the infection, and the Pale King's plan to stop it. There isn't much here that can't be inferred from other lore sources, so we aren't missing much without this extended poem. One interesting thing to note about this poem is that one of the game's developers, William Allen, didn't even know these extra verses existed until after the community found them in the game. This is a reference to a cut lore tablet that was going to appear in the Soul Sanctum alongside record Abba and Senda. It's a real shame too, because this lore tablet actually explicitly tells us how the Soul Sanctum scholars had to perform how their minds worked entirely to gain a mastery over soul. After defeating the false knight in Forgotten Crossroads, the head of his weapon will sprout legs and scuttle away. If you dream nail it, it will even say, "Free at last." If you encounter Mr. Mushroom all 7 times throughout Hollow Nest, he will appear in a post-credits cutscene rocketing through the air. This is followed by a black screen with the text, "To be continued." This is probably implying that Mr. Mushroom will be making an appearance in later games developed by Team Cherry. This would be in line with his character, as the dialogue when encountered in the game implies that he is somehow connected to earlier games made by Team Cherry, such as Hungry. So he's kind of like Phase 1 Nick Fury. Zelda has dream nail dialogue about how she took out her weapon to live a quiet life in the corner, but that she'd like to stretch her legs again sometime soon. William Allen even reiterated this in a Reddit AMA from 4 years ago, as if this dialogue might actually be relevant at some point in the future, or William is just trolling us as usual. Next up on the iceberg are the shallow waters. This is stuff that is pretty easy to overlook, but there still isn't much mystery to it. It's mainly small details about the game or pretty well known behind the scenes development stuff. Empress Musnik is just the early name Team Cherry gave to the Grezlin. Back during the Kickstarter, the enemies that were shown off had these weird names. The Lore Bible is an internal document used by Team Cherry to keep track of Hollow Knight lore. Team Cherry has only ever referred to this document once, in an interview from 2016. It's all planned by the docs.
Of course, everything's fine.
An extensive lore document back then. Will we see this lore document in its entirety someday? Nope. In February 2019, McFarlane Toys teased an upcoming Hollow Knight collaboration on their Facebook account. Later that summer, placeholder displays for Hollow Knight were shown off by McFarlane at the 2019 New York Toy Fair. However, after this, there have been no further updates about the Hollow Knight any explanation about what happened. I guess we're stuck with figures abstracting and discolored flash. The Hunter's Journal doesn't really make sense from a lore perspective. The Hunter explicitly tells us that by defeating enemies, we gain the ability to decipher the text he has written in his Hunter's Journal. There are some instances where it's implied it isn't the Hunter, though. For example, the Dreamer fights and drifting enemies have different symbols over the description text, as opposed to a symbol of the Hunter's. This could imply that he didn't necessarily write these notes, but then how did they get into the journal in the first place? How exactly do we get excerpts from poems like the Grim Troop, or smut like the Great Prince? And even if we ignore those oddities, the Hunter symbol does appear for enemies like the Radiants. Does this mean the Hunter fought the Radiants at some point? In early development screenshots of Hollow Knight, the Heroic enemy had more green shade to its body, and it somehow looks even uglier than what we got in the campaign. There are a number of enemies in the game who give female dialogue that is nothing more than an ellipses. Fool Eater, Lota, Sporg, Shroomaling, Bloodsack, Moss, Shadow Creeper, Broken Vessel, and Moss Kid. It seems more non-animal based enemies, and the ones closely tied to the Abyss, share this attribute. As for Nos, it has this whole thing about being able to read mind. So it's hard to know what it would actually be capable of thinking. Is its dream-mail dialogue just a reflection that the Knight doesn't have thoughts either? If you die in the Lake of Thunder and come back, your shade will be looking out over the lake, just like the Moss Knight also sees it. We know that one is calling out to the Moss Knight. Is the shade also hearing this call, or can it somehow sense her power in another way? Regardless, it's a neat little detail, since we don't see the shade interacting with other creatures in Paladins all that much. Relic Seeker Lent's name is shown as Relic Seeker Lent in development screenshots of the game. Nost's lair is located behind a breakable wall in the lower portion of the Abyss. In this section, Nos appears just out of reach of the player several times, luring them to his boss fight. However, Nos can actually be seen fairly early on in Deepness. Nos first appears in the room leading up to the big drop into lower Deepness. In order to attempt a Pantheon in Godfall, you have to defeat all the bosses who appear in the Pantheon in Paladins. There are two exceptions to this. One is Grey Prince Zone. If you don't save Zone Green Path, Grey Prince Zone won't appear in Godfall at all. And if you do save him, Grey Prince Zone won't appear in a Pantheon until you're fighting with Renaissance. Another exception is Gachi. You don't have to encounter her at all to fight her in the Pantheon with the Sage. This is probably because Team Cherry didn't want to force the player to have to finish the entire Colosseum with fools before being allowed to do the third Pantheon. Lore-wise, it doesn't really make sense, and it kind of breaks the logic of Godfall entirely, but if we factor in gameplay considerations, it's reasonable. As far as I know, we have no idea what the actual name for the City of Tears was before it became the City of Tears. It's been referred to as the Heart of Alnest, but an actual name doesn't appear anywhere else, and chances are we'll never know. Deepness used to be a lot bigger than what we see in the final game. Eventually, the eastern portion of Deepness was reworked to be a new area called the Abyss, which eventually became a catch-all for stuff Team Cherry hadn't found a place for yet. Eventually, this area became known as Kingdom's Edge. The only enemies we see in Fog Canyon are the jellyfish. There are a few bug corpses here and there, but no infected bosses like we see pretty much everywhere else. One theory I've seen is that the jellyfish were explicitly created as a way to contain infection, since they remain entirely passive while the infection remains controlled inside the body. Brum and Nim are both musicians playing on what appears to be an accordion, but if we look closely at this accordion, we can see that it actually has legs, implying it's in the same boat as Macebo. Unfortunately, there is no way to murder Brum to rescue this poor creature, so instead it must suffer an accident as we look on at the accordion. There are some differences between the base mode of Hollow Knight and Steel Soul mode. The two main differences are the Tough is dead in Steel Soul mode, when the player encounters Steel Soul Jin instead of Professor Gigi. Is Steel Soul mode the more canonical route, since death is permanent here? Also, Eleanor from the Wonder apparently encounters Jin and Gigi and Tough. So what's going on there? Also, why is the game mode where you are more fragile called Steel Soul? It's kind of back-asswards, don't you think? There are a lot of funny and memorable voice lines from characters in Hollow Knight, such as far one of the most well-known phrases according to appears to help the night during the Hollow Knight. The popular meme within the community is that she shouts, "Get good," but Team Fury has actually addressed this in a 2018 interview.
The happy coincidence. Is the actual word get good? I believe it's get to. Get good.
This probably refers to how the Congo Waste used to be much bigger early on in development, encompassing the Congo Wastes, Green Path, Queen's Garden, and Cotton Canyon. Over time, Team Fury broke up the area into more segmented and distinct regions. When Zook first appears in Dirt Mountain after being saved in the Forgotten Crossroads, he talks about how other buggies rambling on with infectious air and all this below. In response to this, Zook says, as he simply considered not breathing, puffing early. While we can find Tiso's corpse in King's Edge, we unfortunately never actually see how Tiso was killed in the Coliseum. A popular theory that has been circulated around is that Tiso was killed by the brooding moth that appears in the Trial of the Brood, since that's what he gets killed by in his fake-out scenes in the Pantheon Palace. Throughout the Mantis village are these cloths hanging from the ceiling. Once we gain access to the Marble Pride Room, we can see that these mantises are actually sleeping in these things. How cute! Once you find the Pale King's corpse in the White Palace, you can actually sit on his throne. After a short while, the game will play a royal arrangement as a Hollow Knight. It's a cool little detail that signifies how Hollow Knight is basically in the hands of the knight at this point. Below the iceberg, things start to get more obscure. At least I think they do. It's kind of hard for me to know what details are more well known by the majority of people and which ones are more obscure. I've spent so much time learning about this game that it all kind of runs together. In the earliest promotional material for Hollow Knight, we can see that the three dreamers were more uniform in their design, each sporting the same mask we see Monomon wear in the final game. In the final game, we can even see Archway near the Black Ink Temple, where it still only shows Monomon's mask. Sharpjump Studios is a company that helped Team Cherry port Hollow Knight to the Nintendo Switch. The Switch is not a very powerful machine, and Hollow Knight was very poorly optimized when it first came out, so Team Cherry hired some help to get the game running smoothly on the Switch. When we first encounter the Nailsmith, he thinks we are someone else, asking for him to hone another nail, implying he has done a lot of work on this person previously. The Nailsmith eventually notices we are not the person he thought we were, and he never brings up this other client again. I have no idea who Nailsmith could have been talking to, but I do think there is something going on with the Nailsmith that we just can't know about. When you dream Nail the Pale King in the White Palace, he says the iconic line, "No cost too great." However, there was another line left in the game's code that went unused. He said, "False one, you cannot reach me here." False one probably refers to the Raven, but it seemed Team Cherry wanted the Pale King style to be more reflective of its own actions. The Abyss doesn't really have music like the other areas of the game. Instead, we just get a lot of low droning sound, which conveys the haunting emptiness of the area. However, if you speed up the music, you can actually hear the vessel theme that plays at the start of the game and in the Dream Mill Mori. After beating the third Pantheon in Godwin the first time, you unlock Godseeker. This mode locks you into Godwin permanently, where you can redo all the Pantheon for all gods on a separate save file. It's a small addition for people who want to start new save files immediately in Godwin, but it has some weird lore implications. The Godseeker talks to us completely differently in this mode, groveling to us in longer dialogue. According to a playtester and translator, This entire mode canonically happens after defeating the Pantheon of Powers. So does this mean that all the stuff that's avoided to keep filling God with the void got cleared up? That's good, I guess. But what's going on around? Are we seriously just going to dig around here while God knows what is going on outside? It really is a head scratcher. We only ever see White Lady in her giant tree, so we can assume she used to be smaller and not really underground. Her silhouette can be seen on the back of the chair in the White Palace, and there are some early sketches of her that might show off what she looked like before Helen fell to ruin. In the same little part of Queen Station where we meet Willow, we can see that she has a red text. This has generated a theory that she was once a member of the Grimm Troop, like the Grimstein, but somehow escaped. It's a fun idea, but it seems unlikely to me, honestly. She has no dialogue that even hints at the Grimm Troop. Maybe if she reacted to the Grimm Child in some way, then I'd have more confidence in this theory. Lost Kin is similar to Soul Tyrant's Failed Champion, in that they are all dream variants of bosses found in Hallows. However, when fighting Soul Tyrants and Failed Champion, the Lost Arenas look very similar to the places their normal versions fought. The Lost Kin, however, doesn't follow this trend. It looks like this arena is from the City of Tears or Forgotten Crossroads, as opposed to the Ancient Basin. There really isn't any explanation for why this is the case. The Broken Vessel boss fight used to be located where the Hornet 1 fight is now, but that doesn't really answer our question, since the Lost Kin area doesn't look like Green Path either. In Kingdom's Edge, the player can find the corpse of the ancient Nailsmith, along with several massive nails. Who are these nails for? Is it giant creatures we see throughout Hell to carry these things around and fight one another? It's pretty crazy to think about. There are some development screenshots of Hollow Knight where the knight actually has a fourth soul vessel. There's not much else to say on this. The White Palace has one section where the rooms don't line up at all. The room where the Hell King experimented on Void connects to another room in two separate ways that make no sense geometrically. The White Palace is in the Dream Realm, so it's not that surprising, but it's the only part of the palace that really acts like that. While Dirtmouth is at the top of the world of Palace, it's not quite clear if it's actually on the surface of the world. There's no sun, no moon, no stars. On top of that, Lev, Team Cherry's marketing director, posted on Reddit a few years back saying that Dirtmouth is actually underground. However, there are two mentions of the surface and the surface world that kind of contradict this claim. You can also see that there's actual weather in the storms, which I don't think can happen underground, so I'm not exactly sure what's at play.
Here they are. They scheduled their first. The first running shoe design was Aaron and Aaron's design.
New collagen by projecting receptor vitamin C serum builds collagen, instantly brightens and dramatically even skin
Whataburger Bacon Ranger Double. It's got 2 fresh beef patties, crispy onion strings, with sauce, bacon, avocado, Monterey Jack, and American cheese, roadkill ranch, and gourmet ale toppings. Sassiest thing in Texas. Whataburger. For 50 years, America has depended on the courage of those who serve. Being defended by ancient communities today. At Wounded Warrior Military Community, there is a fighting community dedicated to protecting the veterans, servicemen, and their families. Being defeated is their best. Service has supported February as the group dedicated to the troops of serenity and resilience. Visit WoundedWarriorProject.org/one.
The first 4 pantheons embody the pantheons of the Master, Artist, Sage, and Knight. Those 4 titles spell out the word mask, which is obviously a reference to the 1984 film The Mask, starring Jim Carrey. But there's also the Pantheon of Powers, which would make the complete acronym Maskhood. There's a hidden area in the Hall of God where you can find a break in the wall. Destroying this wall allows Zoth Almighty to break into the Hall of Powers. And there is even unused dialogue that calls Zoth an intruder amongst the gods of Powers. Apparently the Godseekers didn't view him as powerful enough to belong there, which is really saying something considering they have statues of Vengeflies. Blue Lantern is a mysterious, unused asset in the game. It looks like it holds some kind of blue flame, but I have no idea what this would have been used for. This is a myth that has been floating around for a while. One person pointed out that Cornifer sounded like he was speaking Hungarian, to which William Pell replied that the voice actor Dave Kazi is Hungarian. But most people who I've heard from who are Hungarian say that Cornifer is definitely not speaking Hungarian. So it seems like it might only sound Hungarian because it's gibberish being said by a person who happens to be Hungarian. Young Defender used to have female dialogue on his while sleeping, but this dialogue can no longer be accessed in-game because Dreammailing is now linked to the White Defender fight. This is a bit of a shame, because Gizmo also has female dialogue that nicely parallels Young Defender's. When the Knight has the Sharp Shadow charge, its Shade actually takes on a noticeably different appearance during the dashing animations. The Shade now has 6 eyes instead of 2, making it a bit more like the Void entity from the Embrace the Void ending. It also sort of matches the Void 10 villains, who also appear to have 3 eyes on one side of their heads. The gorgeous husk in the City of Tears and the giant geoduck level in the Ancient Basin both give the player a total of 420 geo. From the full development map of Howlers, we can see that Lurian's original name was Lurian the Whisperer, as if this guy wasn't creepy enough. The White Crystal Ring was an item seen in one of the earliest trailers for Hollow Knight. It appeared to be a chargeable vengeful spirit ring, sort of like the Mega Buster from Mega Man 4. What's funny about the White Crystal Rings is that you can actually still see a few of them sitting on Sly's table in the final game. The Hollow Knight was wearing his armor and was sealed away in the Galactic Temple. We see glances of it in the opening, as well as before the Hollow Knight and Pure Vessel fight. We can get a better glimpse of the armor from sources outside the game. It appears in the Godmaster reveal trailer for a brief second, and it's also on a card that comes with a collector's edition of Hollow Knight, sold by Fan Gamer. From this point on, we are mainly going to discuss obscure cut content, stuff that has never really been discussed by Team Cherry, or we only have a tiny bit of information. Lots of single phrases that have appeared on or in codes that we pretty much have no info about. Back in 2017, a collector's edition of Hollow Knight for PC was released by IndieWorks. This edition had a special Grub plush that came along with the game. Included in some of these releases was a document called Grub Care Instructions. The document goes into detail about the habits of grubs, what they like to do, how they show gratitude, and what they do when they are sad. It's unclear who wrote this document or if Team Cherry ever approved it as accurate. But there's one line in particular that raises a few eyebrows. Grubs grow quickly and are ferocious eaters. They will happily eat anything, but it is considered taboo to feed them flesh or eggs. This may give them unseemly appetites. This document makes grubs out to be like fucking gremlins, and people seriously wonder why I hate these little bastards so much. The Dirtmouth Fly is an NPC who appears in 2 very early screenshots of Hollow Knight. These 2 images were found posted on the back end of Team Cherry's website, but they were never actually publicly revealed. So in reality, Team Cherry never even meant for us to see this creature. Why were they hiding it from us? What did it do? In October of 2015, Team Cherry posted an image to Twitter of a whiteboard illustration of some gigantic monster attacking the lighthouse found in the Abyss. This creature didn't make it into the final game. Although it's so massive, I'm not sure if it would translate well to an actual level. In its place, there are just a bunch of void tendrils. And we can even see that these enemies have been stretched and scaled in a way that looks pretty awkward, although you never really see it playing the game legitimately. The Skyward Slash is the name of a custom element the player can find in the Forest of Wellness. It shows up on the full development map of Howlers, alongside the dash attack and spin attack. So at this point, there wasn't the Great Slash of old. I assume Skyward Slash would have been like the Great Slash, but upwards, which doesn't sound too terribly useful, so I'm glad they cut it. There are quite a few entries in this section that come from full development maps of Hellfest we have collected from Team Cherry interviews over the years, so I'll do all of them. Apparently there were going to be cave paintings in Deep Nest, somewhere near where the Hawks Ring is now. I don't know what these cave paintings would have shown. Perhaps it would have given us more history about Deep Nest's inhabitants. We know a little bit about the Weavers who arrived in Deep not much about the non-Weaver creatures who lived there. The faraway grave is an area that would have been located east of the crypts and the resting grounds, near where the Soul Eater drum was found. This area certainly sounds important, but we know absolutely nothing about it. The Pantheon of Stone is the name of the Pantheon shown off in the Nintendo Treehouse Live event at E3 2018. All Night released on Switch at E3 that year, and Team Cherry was in LA to show off the upcoming Godmaster launch. The Pantheon is pretty short, only showing off a few bosses, ending with the unmasked Shield. This Pantheon was probably just thrown together to show off Godmaster at E3. Hornet was revealed on December 9th, 2014, in Update 13 on the Hollow Knight Kickstarter. However, in Update 11, posted on the 6th, Team Cherry shared a drawing of the knight made by Koto Koji, the voice actor for Hornet. It's a weird picture because it looks like some weird combination of the knight and Hornet. Was this sketch where the idea for Hornet came from? There's an early concept sketch of this thing in Deep Nest, known as the Deep Nest Cocoon. We do see giant cocoon-like structures where the beast den is, but they don't look like the sketch. So maybe this is some concept that got cut from the final game. I'm not sure what significance of 249 is. I think it's supposed to be the number of Bellsalts in the White Palace. I counted once and got a total of 247. Maybe Steve Coyote 96 should check their math before they have a little nicer figure. Bomb beetles are a type of weapon mentioned in a document Team Cherry sent out to select backers after the Hollow Knight Kickstarter. This document provided details about the world of Hellas that helped higher tiered backers design their characters. The document has a section all about weapons, and one class of weapon mentioned are bomb beetles. They are described as small, highly volatile creatures that explode when stressed. Relatable. It appears these designs were later used for the life scene and an unused wing variant found in the game's code. We all know about the cut forest of Bones area that is from the Silk Song, but for some reason during development they changed the name of the forest of Bones to Holy Ground. I'm not sure if this is referencing holy grounds or what, but it's definitely weird. For some reason, the Switch release of Hollow Knight has a different background on the screen that shows the player in the autosave. It shows the lifeblood area in the abyss, while all the other versions of the game just show the abyss. If you have watched all my videos, you know that there aren't a lot of technical clues in the area. I have to keep cycling through the same floor file over and over again. But there's one image in particular of Team Cherry standing in some weird, cramped tunnel. This image has always bothered me. Why are they there? Why is the knight just floating in space above them? Why do they look like they're about to drop their necks? This image bothered me so much that when I met Team Cherry in Australia back in 2019, I asked them about this image explicitly. Apparently this picture was taken by the local newspaper after Hollow Knight was nominated for a BAFTA award, and the interviewer decided that they should take a picture underground, since Hollow Knight is a game about underground bugs. So he took them to the Treasury Tunnels in Adelaide, Australia, and I'm glad he did, because this pic goes so hard. I'm happy I was finally able to talk about this obscure detail, although I'm not really sure why Steve Coyo 69 thought it was worth putting on this iceberg. It's barely even related to Hollow Knight, and I'm probably the only person who actually cares. We have very little on the ancient Spider Corps, unfortunately. Basically, it was just a text font that got used. We get to see other ancient creatures throughout Crystal Nest, so it would have been cool to see one that looked more like a spider. The closest thing we have to going is the giant spider we see in the old Hollow Knight trailer, but it might be entirely unrelated. Soul Society was the original name for the Soul Sanctum, but Team Cherry had to change it because everyone kept thinking it was a Bleach reference. Apparently the Soul Society is the name of the afterlife in that show. I honestly know nothing about Bleach though, so let's move on. In his original backer drawing, Tiso had glasses or goggles or something. Maybe his bad eyesight is what got him killed. In an early screenshot of Hollow Knight, we can see dirt carvers hanging out on the ceiling. Thankfully this was removed, as dirt carvers are annoying enough being relegated to just the floor. Desolate Dive Move was originally called Earth Splitter. It was also called Tyrant's Fist in World War II. Here we are at the bottom. There are entries here in the abyss that I don't think anyone in the Hollow Knight community has pantheons in God have these notches that are used to indicate the possible ways to complete them. The main notch gets filled with a gem if you finish the pantheon. If you finish the pantheon with any of the bindings, then those ones will appear as well. If you beat the pantheon with all bindings on at once, then all the gems will shine brightly. But there's actually another condition you can trigger. If you finish the pantheon of Halness without getting hit, the center of the middle gem will shine brightly by itself. Originally, Team Cherry planned for this middle part to actually turn black like void, but they decided that this was going too far. As it stands now, if you do all bindings, it basically overrides if you didn't hit this. So the black gem would have made it a separate condition you have to do to get the unique void gem sprite. Gorg is a backer design character, but the backer didn't actually give him a name. The name Gorg came from Team Cherry. According to Gray, a close friend of Team Cherry's, the name probably came from a television show called Tim and Eric's Awesome Show. Great job! There's a character in the sketch named Gorg. He's the spokesperson for a product called Single, which is a service that sends people mannequins of their dead children. They even send the family new or grown-up ones every so often to make it seem like their child never really left. Yeah, I'm not sure what this means for Gorg and Hollow Knights, but it's probably best we don't discuss this any further. There's been a lot of research into understanding the bug language of Hollow Knight. There are a lot of words and phrases that show up, but it's not clear how Team Cherry goes about creating this bug gibberish. The closest explanation we got comes from an interview the game's composer, Chris Larkin, did on a YouTube channel called The Sound Test.
To be honest, I can't remember exactly what that is, but I think they found a way of generating text and then like reading that backwards. I'll have to ask Bill and Harry how they did it, but
in earlier builds of Hollow Knight, each of the area banners that appear in the save menu had their own files with unique file names. The banner for Beast Den was originally titled Guards Banner. Is Guard something we should know about? Is that the name of the monster who captured us? It's always bothered me that something clearly captured us in this part of the game, but we never get to see it. I'm fairly confident that this creature is hiding inside the Trilobite statue, but that's just speculation on my part, and I really hope we get an actual explanation for this stuff eventually. The Squidworm is an enemy concept for the infected Crossroads. It would have been an infected version of the Gome that fired off infection. That honestly sounds terrible, so I'm glad this did make it into the final game. Lion Shaman comes from another development map of Halness. There was a Lion Village planned somewhere near where the stack station is in the final game, and it seems that there was going to be a shaman there. But what is this Lion Village exactly? One thing we know for sure is that the Lion Village was designed by a top Kickstarter backer. I'm guessing this might be a village of ant lions, but I'm not quite sure. I reached out to Team Cherry about this on Twitter a few years back, and they did let me know that the Lion Village is full of lions. The Coliseum trophy of the Custom Light would have appeared in the Coliseum of Fools. You can actually see how this object would have appeared in the game. There's a scene of the Coliseum still in-game that shows the Coliseum trophy hanging over a much smaller version of the Coliseum. This was probably a pretty early concept of the Coliseum, before they had the trial boards created. Ghost coins are an unused value stored in the player's save data. I think they were an early name for essence, since it's basically just a currency you get from killing ghosts. The main character in Hollow Knight goes by a lot of different names, like Little Ghost, or Little One, Little Shadow. The general consensus in the community is that the main character should be called Little Knight. But according to Team Cherry and a Streamlabs back from Mixer in 2018, the Knight actually has a top secret internal name. This name is used as a way to differentiate the Knight from Hollow Knight for translation purposes. Whether or not this name has any core significance, I guess we'll never know. This one is pretty self-explanatory. To be fair, I have met Jack White in real life, so I think this might be important. But then again, hologram technology has improved a lot over the years. And that's the entire iceberg. There sure was a lot to go through, but hopefully there were some new nuggets of Hollow info you weren't aware of before. That being said, I need to come clean about something. I made this iceberg with the help of a few friends. Steve Cleo 96 is nothing more than an unpaid actor. But please understand, I really wanted to do an iceberg video that wasn't full of memes or stuff I already properly. And it was a perfect excuse for me to finally talk about this one picture of Team Cherry skating in the fucking tunnel.
Vitamins Neutrogena College K, 15% pure vitamin C serum.
For advancing civilization are just all gone. So most of the humans have collapsed in the sand. It's interesting to think of a world where worms were more prevalent, and there were tons of nearby kingdoms engaging in trade and warfare. Of course, while this might explain the current state of the world, it raises another question. Why did all the worms die out in the first place? Did they destroy the natural ecosystem of the world by their actions, leading their population to drop? And why did the Pale King die specifically in Howland? Is there something unique about this patch of Earth that draws the likes of the Pale King and other civilizations to try and claim all of it? These are some pretty broad questions that I'm not sure we'll ever get clear answers to. And the Pale King isn't the only worm we know about. The black worm is mentioned in the author's journal entry for the Dumb Defender, where he mentions that he participated in the battle of the black worm. And that's all we have of the black worm. This pitiful amount of information has led to a wide variety of theories, and I think it might be worth discussing a few of them here. One of the most popular theories out there is that the black worm is the corpse that houses the Colosseum of Fools. In my dedicated Colosseum of Fools video, I dismiss this idea pretty strongly. But since anything related to the black worm is speculation, let's lay out the evidence. First of all, this ancient bug corpse is very unique from every other ancient corpse we see in Howlands. It appears to have chains going into it, as if someone was trying to immobilize it, perhaps because this creature was approaching into Howlands during the Pale King's reign. This could signify a battle. Second, the Lord Pool might be like the Pale King in that it was born from the carcass of the larger Colosseum above. The name Lord Pool might have even been part of his punishment for trying to invade the Pale King's kingdom, and he's been relegated to stay inside his cast-off shell on the edge of the kingdom. Third, the worship of the Lord Pool we see from bugs like the Lord Pool might be part of the purposeful bugs into their thrall line from Mr. Mushroom we discussed earlier. This might also explain why the Colosseum houses infected bugs that seemingly still retain their ability to act non-hostile towards the knights. The hurdles this theory has the fact that this corpse looks nothing like the cast-off shell. It has limbs, it isn't molting, the interiors look different. There's also Colin, who identifies the cast-off shell as a worm, but not the Colosseum of Fools corpse. In order for this theory to work, you have to argue that the pale worm isn't representative of all worm types, which I think does have merit, but I think the Colosseum worm idea strays a little bit too far. The other argument I've been seeing pop up is that the black worm isn't a worm at all. This stems from a lack of consistency between its name and every other instance of the word worm we see in the game. Anytime the word worm is used outside of black worm, the word is by itself. Most instances of the word just say worm by itself with a capital W, with a few instances where it's just in lowercase. There's also the one time Grimm uses the word worm with an O, seemingly to mock the Pale King. The only other time, aside from black worm, where we get an adjective in front of the word is when it's written as pale worm, two words, both capitalized, as opposed to just one word. Personally, I don't find this line of thought to be very compelling either, mainly because if it's not a worm, what is it? Generally, the theory follows that the black worm was some kind of location, perhaps a place with a structure that looked like a worm or something to that effect, or maybe it's named after a battle tactic, like the Battle of the Bulge. While this might alleviate the discrepancy between pale worm and black worm, I don't think it's a very sound idea on the whole. The only other idea I can think of is that the black worm is a different worm with its own kingdom that possibly fought against the Pale King at some point in the past. It seems like if any hierarchy could form a militia to do something like that, it would be a worm. So yeah, that's my take on those 4 words of lore. Void is a very complex subject in Hogwarts, so much so that there is a 70-page lore document written by someone in talks detailing all the different aspects of Void and its impact on the world. But in this section, I'm going to discuss something only briefly mentioned in this document and never mentioned on this channel. While Soul Nests have clear sources from which they are created, we have no clue how Void is formed. Void is always described as a darkness or an emptiness, which aren't really things that can be created, but instead are an absence of something else. However, there is one comparison that could explain where Void comes from: regrets. When dying and losing its shade in Hollow Knight, the knight can recover it by giving a rancid egg to Confessor Gigi in German. Gigi describes the missing shade as a regret, which leaves a dark stain on it. And after the knight collects the Void Heart, Gigi even describes the knight as coming to terms with its own regrets. But it's not just the knight's regrets that Gigi speaks about. Gigi notes that the entire kingdom of Owlers has become thick with the stains of regret. It's possible that Gigi is aware of the other shades trapped in the abyss, but the fact that she says the entire kingdom is stained might mean that she can sense the regrets of all the Bugs that died since Owlers collapsed. This idea that normal Bugs can also leave stains of regret is reiterated by the Hunter in the journal entry called Shade Language. Each of us leaves an imprint of something when we die, a stain on the world. I don't know how much longer the king can bear the weight of so many past lives. This regret motif appears one more time, scribbled on the tablet located just outside of the abyss. The tablet describes the abyss and the discarded vessels as the refuse and regret of the Hollow Knight's creation. So there are quite a few connections between Void and regrets. But the problem with this theory is that we don't really see non-Void creatures actually create Void. There are occasional Bugs that have black streaks under their eyes, such as Great Winterstead Lover, Allure Fool, No Eyes, Maskmaker, and Karina, but there really isn't any slam dunk connections here. For the Mantis, those could be tears. For No Eyes, blood. For Lord Fool, it could be weathering, like what we see on statues and paintings that have eyes. And as for Maskmaker and Karina, there really isn't any indication that either of these two characters have any regrets. But I think there is at least one plausible example of a non-Void creature leaving a dark stain on the world: the Pale King. The entirety of the White Palace hidden in the realm still shines with that bright, pale light, with the only two exceptions being the White Palace workshop and the Pale King's throne. From the dialogue with royal retainers, as well as Maskmaker, we know that the Pale King was racked with shame and deeply troubled. Ultimately, the Pale King faded away, alone on his throne, and the deep regrets he held inside stained the throne, shrouding it in a thick cloud of void. While I think this makes a lot of sense thematically, it might be a little too much of a stretch to say Void originates entirely from regrets, especially since the way Void is used in the rest of the game doesn't reflect this idea. Team Cherry might have just used the regrets concept as a way to keep the concept of Void a mystery, since the player could potentially meet GG very early on in the game, but it's the best explanation I have